My next guest is an adventurer and professional expedition leader. He has spent the last decade embarking upon intrepid adventures across the world. In the winter of 2016, he traveled overland by any means alone from Hong Kong to Istanbul, along the 8,000-mile mountainous spine of Asia, crossing 11 countries and climbing 14 mountains in midwinter. His adventures have taken him all over the world, and today on the podcast we talk about some of his incredible expeditions around the world. So, I am delighted to introduce Oli France to the podcast.
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Well, it's absolutely great to have you on. I mean, you've been to so many countries. Your time traveling has taken you over to 70 odd countries. You've been from Hong Kong to Istanbul, Serbia, Iraq, the Congo, and I can't wait to sort of jump into it. But I always like to sort of start at the beginning and sort of try and understand how you sort of got into this sort of line of work, all these adventures.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been sort of a lifelong journey to get to this stage, really. And it was, I grew up in a small town in northern England and was really only introduced to the outdoors at the age of 16. I went on this outward bound weekend and did climbing for the first time, got instantly hooked. Off the back of that, I signed up to a 3-year university degree course in outdoor leadership, which is, believe it or not, an actual degree. And really that was the start of it all. And I was just hooked. This degree course gave me the opportunity to learn from some of the best instructors in the UK in the fields of mountaineering, rock climbing, canoeing, kayaking. They encouraged us to go off and travel in our summers. And ever since then, I've been trying through various means to just forge this career in adventure. And I'm absolutely loving every minute of it.
Wow, because I know that you are up in sort of sort of around the Lake District. Is that sort of the place where your sort of grounding for these adventures sort of happened? Or was it more of a punt somewhere around the world, flick a map, and you were like, right, I'm doing that to there?
Well, I suppose it was quite a close link between those two, because yes, at the age of 16, I went and had my first experience in the outdoors and got hooked. And then at the age of 17, I remember, and just to give context, I've managed to fit in a lot of travels in the time since then. But starting out, I had no idea what I was doing, no idea whatsoever. And I remember I just passed my driver's test. So I had this beaten up old car. My girlfriend and I, we went up to try and climb the highest mountain, Scafell Pike in the Lake District. I had no clue what I was doing. I was wearing a big, thick ski jacket, sweating like crazy. I even took these little collapsible chairs up with me because I thought, well, where are we going to sit? And I distinctly remember going up that mountain, having a horrible time, not knowing what I was doing at all. And yet all these people coming past me looked so comfortable and content, and they were breezing along. They had the right kit. And I thought, I want to get to the stage where I'm as comfortable in these harsh conditions as they are. And that was a light bulb moment for me. I realized that I needed to go and do the training, do the work, learn from experts, and push myself out into more of those environments.
Were the deck chairs used at the top of Scafell Pike?
Well, we would have got them out on the top, but we didn't make it, which is hardly surprising because, I couldn't navigate at that stage. The cloud was coming in, it was raining. As I say, that whole thing was a calamity. But I'm probably not the first person to have made these big mistakes. The important thing is figuring out how not to make them again.
And so from there, we always failure is the best way of learning. But from there, you, I suppose, probably had bigger plans to sort of travel the world. Yeah,
that's right. And right from my time at university, I wanted to get out there. I'd grown up with this map on my bedroom wall, and I was obsessed with the world and reading about it, learning about it, reading adventure books. And so I went off and worked in America one summer, and the next summer I wanted to push things a little further. So I'd learned a bit of Arabic. I went out to Lebanon at the age of, I think, 19. Spent about 6 weeks out there living with a local family. And that was an eye opener. Lebanon was just coming out of a war. I was planning to go into Syria at the time. That was just all kicking off with the Arab Spring. Following year, went over to Uganda, then went and did a big gap year after university, and I just could not get enough. Things did change though when I got back into the UK after all of those travels, and kind of checked my bank account and thought, oh, maybe I need to get a proper job at last, like everybody's been telling me. And so I did that unfortunate classic thing of just falling into a job which I really didn't enjoy. I was selling kitchens, or at least trying to sell them, but I was absolutely hopeless. And, I had in many ways, it was a great job. The wage was good. There was a nice bonus scheme. I had a company car, a phone, a laptop. I had the freedom to work from home, to work on my own schedule. I had very little pressure from my boss. It sounds like the dream job, but I'd never been as miserable in my life, because all of this excitement from adventure and from travel had just disappeared. It had vanished. And for 2 years, I worked that job completely miserable. And so it got to the point where I realized, if I'm going to carry on trying to forge a career in adventure, I really need to do something about it. And so what I did, I quit my job with nothing else lined up whatsoever. It was terrible timing. I had a house renovation ongoing. I was just about to get married. I had no prospect of any future work, but I quit the job and decided to embark on probably what remains my biggest and most ambitious adventure to date. And I planned to journey from Hong Kong to Istanbul alone in the middle of winter, traveling by any means across the mountainous spine of Asia and climbing at least one mountain in each country visited. And in the start of 2016, that was what I set out to do.
Wow. And so that sort of journey, what was the planning like for that trip? For Hong Kong to Istanbul, after you quit your job, how did it all sort of come about, from the idea to the first day in Hong Kong?
Yeah, good question. And very much simple concept. It's point A to point B. And yeah, that's what I knew. That was the premise of the trip. But then I realized, there's so many intricacies to this. There's so many different routes you could take. Different countries you could go through. There's bureaucratic issues, visas you need to pick up, etc. And of course, the big issue was actually trying to raise the funding for it at a time when, as I say, I was going through the house renovation, had a wedding coming up, and had to quit my job. So what my focus started to be on was fundraising for the trip. So I managed to talk in some local sponsors, got a bit of local newspaper coverage, worked with a couple of local schools, gradually managed to build up some funds to such an extent that actually the planning took rather a back step. And so about 10 minutes before I was due to be picked up to go to the airport to Hong Kong, I was still stood, I think, in my underpants, in my underwear in the kitchen, ironing these sponsor labels onto my T-shirt and, cramming last items in my bag. So it wasn't the perfect planning and preparation situation. But then there I was in Hong Kong a few hours later with a bag of stuff, with a plan. I knew where I needed to go. It was 8,000 miles away on the other side of a continent. I had some basic ideas of visas and how I could travel about. But really, it was a case of, let's just see where this journey takes me. I didn't have an exact route in mind. I wanted to be free and open to possibilities, to changing plans. And I think actually for this particular trip, having that flexible approach really did pay dividends. And it allowed me to just experience so many things which I could just say yes to at the click of a finger and go off and have these little extraordinary side adventures.
How did the fiance take it?
Yeah. Well, I told you I was rubbish at selling kitchens. Probably missold this trip as well, because when she asked me how long it was going to take, I kind of scratched my head and said, well, about 6 weeks. It turned out to be almost 4 months. So yeah, it was. It required a bit of some difficult conversations, but luckily I do have a very supportive wife, and the wedding did go ahead when I made it back some months later, I'm glad to say.
So starting in Hong Kong, what was the sort of route to Istanbul? Because you were climbing every mountain in every region. You went from Hong Kong into China, and then sort of what, down Tajikistan?
Through a loop down through Vietnam and Laos, back up into China, through the northern part of Tibet, all the way across China, Central Asia, and then across over into the Caucasus countries and Turkey to Istanbul. That was the route.
Oh, wow. And so climbing every mountain, were you guided on these mountain trips, or were you just going it alone?
So the majority of the treks I was doing solo. A couple of them were guided for different reasons. So in Vietnam, for example, I was climbing the highest mountain, Fansi Pan. It's virtually impossible to get access to the mountain without a local guide. And actually, sometimes having those local guides really does add to the experience. And it's something I do a lot of now is employ local guides with that expert knowledge, because that really can be invaluable, can help you get in tricky situations. Other times it was a case of taking a look at a mountain range. Say I was in Almaty in Kazakhstan, for example. You've got the northern part of the Tian Shan Mountains just to the south. Just an enormous mass of huge white snow-capped mountains. And I actually met a local mountain guide there, got some advice from them. They suggested a mountain. And for the next few days, I went off and did it and bivvied up on a 3,500 meter ridge and just had this extraordinary solo adventure. Certainly wasn't without its risks, but yeah, it was just on a wing and a prayer, taking big risks, being bold, getting it out in the mountains, and trying to achieve that goal that I'd set for myself.
I think we had Harrison Carter on last week, and he was, or the week before, and he was basically saying how valuable it can be to take a guide. I mean, a lot of the time people think, oh, I need to go it alone because it'll be about me. But actually, how valuable it is for getting local knowledge about where to go, what are the best bits. And sometimes they show you things which you would otherwise miss.
This is something which I absolutely agree with. And it's something which I stick with now personally. I do always find a local expert, a local guide, or have some kind of local support, especially when going into more volatile or risky, high-risk areas. That layer of security that they give you, no matter how much research you do, on your laptop, having that local expert who knows where you can and can't go, any things that you should be looking out for, where your water sources could be, that source of local knowledge, it's there. You just need to find that person who can give it to you. And to ignore that, you're going to be making things harder for yourself. And often, as you say, it just adds to the adventure. We can be obsessed with doing everything ourselves, and I certainly was guilty of that when I first got into travel. But the more I've traveled, yes, having those local contacts has just proved to be totally invaluable.
Was there a good example along that trip where you sort of their knowledge became sort of essential?
I'll give one example. I was in Tajikistan, and I was in capital Dushanbe, and I was looking for my mountain. my Tajik mountain. Of course, Tajikistan is full of mountains. I think about 90% of the country is over 3,000 meters. So there's really no shortage of mountains, but I wanted something interesting. And I'd read in the museum, actually, I just went in there one day and saw this tiny note about these fossilized dinosaur footprints, which could be found near this remote mountain village in Tajikistan. And that's all it was, one sentence. I did some reading online. There was virtually nothing available. And then it just so happened that evening I spoke to somebody whose family was from this very remote village. And she said, if you want to go there, I'll take you. Come with me the next day. And so we jumped in this shared taxi. We traveled for a couple of 100 miles across the country to make it to this very remote small settlement in the mountains. I went around speaking to the villagers about this idea of these fossilized dinosaur footprints. Some people believed me, some people didn't. Some said, "Oh yes, I've heard about that." Ultimately, we got a few people together and we went off and ventured out into the mountains. After several hours of trekking, we came across this enormous 50 or 60 meter cliff, embedded on which were hundreds of fossilized dinosaur footprints. And it was one of the most extraordinary journeys. And without that local guide, without that local expertise, there's no way I would have stumbled across that remote cliff near this far off village in Tajikistan. So yes, there can just be a gateway to these really extraordinary next level experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I remember on one of my trips, I was heading across America and heading towards Salt Lake City. And at the time, my American knowledge was next to nothing. And I was heading to Salt Lake City. I stopped off at this place called Jeffrey City. And I was at a bar speaking to one of the bikers there. He was like, "Where are you going?" I said, "Salt Lake City." He said, "Ooh, you don't want to go there." I was like, "Well, why not?" And he was like, "You take a detour and head towards sort of Jackson Hole." And like, I didn't know what Jackson Hole was at the time. And anyway, from there, sort of Jackson Lake, the Teton Mountains, I went through them all. And it was the most sort of one of the most spectacular places in America. But just by that sort of one chat with the local, changed my entire route across America. And just going with local knowledge, I think, is so important on some of these trips.
Yeah, totally agree.
And so you sort of went through, about 11 different countries on your route. Some of them probably quite what sort of year are we talking with this?
So this was 2016.
2016. Because you're going through probably... because I was in Central Asia 3 years ago, you're going through quite closed off countries. Did you have any issues along the way with those countries?
So yes, the big one that springs to mind is when I crossed over into Uzbekistan. And it was interesting because I'd spent my time traveling through Central Asia, and I'd heard whispers of this drug trafficking trade coming up from Afghanistan. Afghanistan accounts for about 95% of the world's heroin supply, and much of that goes up through Central Asia. So it's very sensitive for that particular issue. Layered on top of that, Uzbekistan is a very strict dictatorship. And so I knew that I had to be careful on going there. As I crossed the border from Tajikistan, it was late at night. I was the only person crossing the border. I've been warned, just be careful in Uzbekistan. And sure enough, as I got into the border, they stamped my passport, then took me into this other room and said, "Okay, we need your phone, your camera, your laptop. We want to look at everything in your bag, and we're going to do a full body search." And that was that for the next 2 hours. So they scrolled through every file on my laptop, looking at my phone. As I say, did a full body search. It seemed to be all going fine. And then in my rucksack, they found my first aid kit, which contains some cocodamol tablets, which essentially strong painkillers. And unbeknown to me, although they're perfectly legal in the UK, They're classed as an illegal narcotic in Uzbekistan. And so from that moment forward, I was detained as a drug trafficker and interrogated for several hours. Ultimately, I was detained for 5 days in Uzbekistan. I was taken down to the Afghan border. I had loads of urine samples taken. There was all kinds of strict measures imposed on me. Ultimately, I was driven out to this, what turned out to be an ex-KGB military post, and they're offered two options. It was either 30 days in jail or I pay a hefty fine. And let's just say it was the best $500 I've ever spent. But if you know anything about the Uzbek currency, the biggest banknote is worth about 50p. So to get $500 worth, I ended up with a carrier bag full of cash, which I was taking into this remote military outpost to pay my way out of jail. And so, I mean, it was this crazy story. After I paid the fine, I did get my passport back, and the guard actually said to me, okay, you're free to leave Uzbekistan now. But I had no intention of leaving. I wanted to carry on my journey. Luckily, I befriended the interpreter who'd been helping me, and he helped me to get into a taxi, which took me way up to a remote part of the mountains there in Uzbekistan. And there I would carry on my journey. But that was only after being followed by police, having policemen spy through my bedroom windows, and ultimately taking a 500-mile journey across the country, changing taxis in every town to try and evade the police and get myself out of the country. So that was quite the adventure, really. So Uzbekistan stays quite high in my memory.
I'm sure. I have to say, I loved Uzbekistan when I went. I think it has some amazing people and such beautiful architecture. But you didn't get the chance to sort of see the mountainous region, which is something I might look back on. But these sort of adventures sort of have taken you all over the world. I mean, you've been to over 70 odd countries, and one of your recent ones was in Siberia, probably on a more different. It seems that you quite like the cold and the mountainous regions. So Siberia was 60 days? Was it 16 days? 16 days walking across the lake up there. How did that trip come about?
So this was Lake Baikal, which is located in Siberia, just north of Mongolia, and it is the world's largest freshwater lake. And every winter, because of the extreme temperatures there, the entire lake surface freezes over. And a couple of years before the trip, I'd seen some images of this ice, and it was just extraordinary, filled with these cracks and bubbles and formations. I'd never seen anything like it. And, trip inspiration comes from all kinds of different places. But for me, for this one, it was just this image of this extraordinary ice. And so I started to think about a journey there. And, as I did my research, I gradually grew to appreciate the true scale of this lake. It's just over 400 miles long, which is about the distance from London to Edinburgh. It contains a third of the world's fresh water. It's that big, and it's also a mile deep, making it the world's deepest lake. So it is just this massive expanse of ice. And I'd heard of a few people going out there and doing these treks along the surface of this ice in the winter. And so that was what I set out to do. And so it would be a 405-mile journey. It would be fully solo, self-supported, and dragging all of my stuff in a 60-kilogram sled. Which contained the tent, my sleeping bag, my stoves, my fuel, my safety equipment, everything I needed to survive on that lake for 16 days.
And what sort of temperatures are we talking about here?
So in the real depths of winter, it can get down to around minus 40. When I was there, it was a little later in the season, so you tend to wait until around early March when the lake is completely frozen. but still the air temperature was around -20 at night. And then when you add to that the often gale force winds, it really is quite cold up there for sure. Yeah.
Wow. And so 16 days without seeing anyone. What was the sort of scenery like there? For people who are listening, it's probably quite difficult to sort of explain, but what's the sort of feelings and the scenery that you have when you're out alone on this freshwater lake?
Well, the most profound thing really, and the thing that takes a long time to get used to, is just being on the ice. You know, that constant knowledge that if you were to make the wrong step on a particular bad patch, you could potentially go through the ice. But this surface, it is like a living beast. And you have this island called Ulkan Island, which has some shamans living on it. And they regard Lake Baikal as a living beast. And having spent time there, I can totally understand what they mean, because it is constantly moving, cracking, shifting, banging. There are these pressure ridges which form, which might be, 4 or 5 meter high, just jumbles of ice. You get these great big channels of open water, which you need to overcome. And as I say, even when you're sleeping in your tent at night on the ice, because I did camp on the ice using ice screws to secure my tent to the ice, you're lying with your face just inches away from the ice, and it is constantly shuddering and tremoring and banging, and it really is quite disturbing and unsettling. And yeah, no matter how long you're there, you never fully get used to that sensation of okay, my life is at the mercy of this ice underneath me. Beside the ice, you've got a very, very mountainous area right around the lake, particularly in the northern part. And up there, it is just pristine beauty. I remember one day, often it was stormy and windy, but one day it was beautiful conditions, blue sky, no wind whatsoever, just a nice thin layer of snow on the ice. And I sat down on my pulk at lunchtime, and I don't think I've ever heard silence like it, because there's virtually no wildlife up there either, especially at that time. Most of it would be hibernating or would migrate away. And it was just total silence, nobody around for perhaps 100 miles. That was a really special moment.
Wow, it sounds absolutely incredible. And so food, are you dehydrated foods? Are you drilling holes in the lake to try and catch fish?
I would have loved to try that. And actually, near a couple of towns, you do see people doing that. And they have an amazing setup with these huge tents and wood-burning stoves and plenty of vodka, no doubt, because I was offered some on occasions. But yes, my diet was much more along the idea of squeezing as many calories as possible into as little weight as possible. So it was dehydrated meals. It was big blocks of cheese, flapjacks, cooked meats, chocolate, nuts. I would also use sort of meal replacement powders, which are just a quick hit of calories. So I was consuming around 4,500 to 5,000 calories a day, and then towards the end, closer to 6,500 calories, and that would condense down into about a kilo of food per day. And I budgeted for 20 days, so 20 kilos of food. The good news is, as you go on, your sled is getting gradually lighter as you eat your way through that enormous stash of food.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way of sort of doing it, I feel. But I imagine the idea of sitting under a tent with a warm stove, fishing must have been quite tempting at times.
Yes, yeah, it would have been quite a cool little experience.
And so from this is sort of what's propelled you into this idea, well, the sort of guiding as your sort of career in adventure, really, hasn't it? It's these sort of mini trips is sort of cemented your passion for the great outdoors.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So particularly after this big Asian expedition in 2016, I'd always done bits of work with other people, coaching and, guiding at a lower level. And more, I was tempted to move away from these solo experiences and just share the mountains and the great outdoors with other people, because that is really an extraordinary experience in itself. Seeing new places and new experiences through other people's eyes, seeing the joy they get from those travel experiences, and having the privilege of being their guide. And so, yes, I decided to really dedicate myself to trying to achieve that as a career. Picked up some extra qualifications as a winter mountain leader, and really cut my teeth by just getting out there and leading tours and expeditions right across the globe. And they've taken me now to 22 countries. I've guided people through right across Asia and Africa, including some quite unusual destinations like Iraq and Somalia and Yemen and Congo. And all the time meeting countless fascinating people from all walks of life, from various nationalities. And really now that has become my big passion, and something which I'm very, very excited to get back to in 2022, now that this COVID thing is blowing over.
Yes, one hopes. So Iraq, I know that you've been there quite a few times. What makes you go back again and again? What is it about Iraq that's so appealing?
Yeah, I get this question quite a bit because, of course, Iraq is not known as a tourist destination, particularly. It's, all you tend to read, of course, about Iraq are negative news headlines. And I had found time and again when I've been to places such as Iraq is, people living normal lives, starting businesses, having families. That's not newsworthy, so you don't hear about it. Yet in these countries, you've got millions of people doing exactly that. Yes, there may be these extraordinary incidents that are terrible and do happen occasionally. But if you're careful with the right guides, you can avoid that. And Iraq was one of these places that I do remember having a particular degree of, hesitation about going to. You sign up to these trips in a nice, comfortable living room at home. It's just answering a yes on an email often or something like that. And then it's very different feeling to fly into that country, looking down on, what has been a war-torn country for years. But actually what I found very quickly was when I got into Iraq, it is one of the most spectacularly hospitable, kind, generous, warm places that I've ever visited. And everybody who I've taken there has said the same thing. And so, yeah, I do have a real strong connection with the country now, particularly the northern part, the northern Kurdish part, where I've spent most of my time. But yeah, it's just a fascinating place which breaks down all of those stereotypes. And I did want to try and push things a little further, which I think I mentioned to you before about this idea of going out and trying to climb the highest mountain in Iraq, which to that point had actually only been done by a handful of foreign climbers.
God, I know. I think you're so right with that. So many times people hear these sort of stories of these countries and they only see one side. And as you say, on a day-to-day, 99% are just getting on with their lives, doing pretty much what we do on a day-to-day. Get up, go to work, family, food, whatever it is. That's their day-to-day, just like us. But of course, the media sort of quite often portrays some of these countries in such a negative light.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it is just a case of, well, let's go and see it for myself. And, that's often the best proof. Just seeing something for yourself, making those human connections, which no matter where you go, no matter the language barriers, it's possible to build those amazing human connections and to communicate and to laugh and to share stories. Like I say, even if you don't speak the same language, it's possible. And that for me is also one of the most extraordinary things about travel.
On your sort of guiding expeditions, what other parts of the world have you sort of visited where you've sort of come into such incredible hospitality and the kindness of strangers?
Well, Central Asia is certainly up there, as I mentioned, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. And other than that, yeah, I would say Iran has got to be up there. You know, Iran had been on the list for years, and I know you've been there as well. And all I'd heard from everybody about Iran was it is the friendliest place you'll ever go to. And, you know, it's hard to argue with that, having been there. Just this extraordinary warmth from the people in the country. And, you know, it's not unusual to get invited into people's homes, to get, you know, offered cups of tea, and to you know, constantly be bombarded for selfies. Yeah, Iran is a fascinating and amazing place. And again, that's where that separation comes in of politics and people. You know, often we judge countries based on their politics, but forget about that. You know, it's all about the people, and 99% of people, wherever you go, whatever their religion, are good. And, you know, time and again, I've found that to be true.
Yeah, I had such an amazing experience in sort of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. I remember in Tajikistan, we were in like the Wakhan corridor, and for anyone who hasn't been there, it's like two mountains either side, and you go through the sort of corridor. And anyway, we were looking for a place to camp, so went up onto the sort of slight escarpment at the top. And as we were there sort of unpacking, thinking we're in the middle of nowhere, suddenly these kids run out, and the father runs out. Father didn't run, sorry, walks out. And we were like, oh God, now we're going to be kicked off or anything. And anyway, we get sort of chatting, and he's like, come and have supper with us. You know, don't pitch your tent there on the rocks, come pitch it on the grass. And we just had the most amazing night there with them. And you know, they showed us around, told us where to go. And it's just these little experiences that you get along the way that make such an amazing experience of travel and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And sometimes the most powerful word is hello. It is making that introduction, you know, because we can stare at each other and figure each other out a little bit. And sometimes there's cultural differences, you know, in terms of how you would approach a stranger. But just breaking down that barrier with a hello, you know, that can just lead to these extraordinary experiences like you've described.
Yeah. And you've also said that you've been sort of the Congo, Somalia. Somalia is an interesting one because, one, I don't know a lot about it, but probably for people listening, they'd be really interested to sort of know what sort of guided tours or what you were doing over there.
Yeah, so Somalia is very interesting, and yes, that is a genuinely unstable place. It's a very, very tribal country. So you get large expanses of the country which are controlled by various tribes. In the northern part, you got the southern part, which, you know, you got Mogadishu down there, the capital. That is without question very dangerous. And you know, I know people who have been there. You know, typically they'd have 5 or 6 armed guards around them at all times. I've not been there and don't have any intentions of going there. But up in the northern part, you've got Puntland, which is again slightly less volatile, and then Somaliland, which is a region, at the northern part, which backs onto the Red Sea. And that's been a semi-autonomous state for a number of years now. They're trying to get their own recognition as a separate country. And compared to the rest of the country, it is a fairly safe place to go. And it's got some really fascinating sights. And so one of the big things was a place called Las Gale, which sits way out in the Somali desert. You have to drive for hours to get there. But what it is this enormous cave structure, which contains hundreds of these prehistoric human rock art paintings. And this has actually only been discovered a number of years ago. And I've been out there twice now with groups. There's also a fishing port that you can go to. But this cave is just extraordinary. And for me, it's a metaphor for this idea that often exploration, you know, we think about the poles and we think about the Himalayas and big mountains. But there's another sort of angle to exploration, I feel, which is these places which have been cut off for so many generations through war, through dictatorship, which contain these real gems that nobody has explored before, nobody's seen before. And yeah, I can think of a small handful of places just like that. You know, another one would be the Yemeni island of Socotra, which I was lucky to go to last year. Just these amazing little gems which get no tourism whatsoever. Yes, they're hard to get to. Yes, you need to be careful and take local guides with you, but they are some of the most extraordinary places on the planet.
Amazing. God, it sounds just so incredible. And you're so right. This sort of idea of exploration, a lot of people put it into a sort of narrow box or a narrow idea of adventure and exploration, but it can be so much more than that. And yeah, it's just awesome to sort of hear your stories and hear such amazing stories from such, you know, misunderstood countries in a sense.
Yeah, that is really where my passion lies now, is just pushing the boundaries and trying as hard as possible to forget those stereotypes. Of course, thinking about safety and planning for that, and planning for it very extensively, but pushing beyond those stereotypes and getting out to places that most people aren't willing to visit.
Oh, well, Oli, thank you so much for sort of coming on and sharing those stories. There's a part of the show where we ask the same 5 questions to each guest each week, with the first being, on these sort of trips and expeditions, what's the one gadget that you always take with you?
Yeah, you might have had this one before. This would be my Garmin Inreach, which is a satellite tracking device. It allows you to communicate with the outside world. It's got a great big SOS button, which you hope never to press, but it's there if you need it. I've traveled without that and got myself into hairy situations, but having that as a backup layer, safety buffer, to me, it's invaluable, and I would recommend it to anyone going out into the wilds.
Yeah, we had one when we went across Central Asia, and you can also track exactly where you've been, and so it's also good to sort of show other people where you are at any given time. What about your favorite adventure or travel book?
This is a very tough one because I really do love adventure books. One I read recently, which is probably not too well known, but I would recommend to anyone, is called 438 Days by Jonathan Franklin. And it is this incredible tale of survival. It's, without giving too much away, a Honduran guy who found himself in Mexico working as a fisherman out in a storm. Everything gets swept overboard. His motor cuts out, and then there he is with his inexperienced crewmate in a boat with only a little bit of food. And then this is his story, floating across the Pacific Ocean for, yeah, you guessed it, 438 days. But yeah, what an amazing story about survival. I believe it's going to be made into a TV show or film, but I would fully recommend getting your hands on that book and reading it. Very inspiring.
I remember when that story came out. Just like most people didn't believe it. It was sort of
no, they didn't believe it. No.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true.
I will have to check that book out. Why are adventures important to you?
For me, and probably for many people on your podcast, it is just my lifeblood. I thrive off it. When I've had long periods without adventure, I really, really miss it and I crave it. And, probably the bigger reason, we only have one opportunity this thing called life. And so I just want to grab it with both hands and to just have an amazing ride and to not have any regrets and to get out there and see as much of this amazing planet as I possibly can.
Favorite quote?
So this comes from John Milton's Paradise Lost, and it is, our mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Essentially, that means that whatever situations we find ourselves in, we can use our own perspective to make that a good thing or a bad thing. And I think that's a really useful thing to keep in mind often in hard situations, in expeditions or in life.
Yeah, I think, it's a good one. I like that. People listening are always keen to travel and go on these sort of trips and expeditions like yourself. What's the one thing that you would recommend for people wanting to get started?
The big one is just start. And I speak to so many people who say, oh, I've got this big plan to eventually do this, and I just need to shuffle some things around, just need to, after this job. And I just ask them, if not now, then when? You know, it's just a case of just starting, just go and do something. It doesn't need to be the biggest, most expensive dream expedition, first of all. Just get out the front door, go climb a mountain, go meet some people, go have a micro adventure. Just start, get stuck into it, learn things along the way, build your way up, learn from experts if you possibly can, and have a great time doing it. But just start, that is the key.
Yeah, very true. I think quite a lot of people have said that when people just sort of say, oh, I'm going to do this and do that, you know, you just stand there and be like, okay, well, I believe you, go and do it.
Yeah, make it happen. Yeah.
Finally, what are you doing now, and how can people follow you in the future?
So as I say, things are hopefully looking up for 2022. I've got a number of trips planned, and also very excited to launch my own expedition company, Wild Edge, where I'll be guiding people on remote and wild adventures across the world. So please do come and say hi. I'm at Oli_France on Instagram, and you can follow all my updates there, and hopefully join me on an adventure sometime.
And it's wildedge.com?
wild-edge.org.uk.
Amazing. So, Oli, can't thank you enough for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to your stories. And as I say, you've got quite a number of trips and expeditions lined up for 2022. So we'll be following your journey. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you, and I had a great conversation. Cheers.